How's it going, Reef Keepers? Welcome to season 2 of We the Reefers. Finally, the long summer drought is over. My kid is officially back in school, and I'm just prepping for the fall semester to begin when I begin teaching. And once my schedule's locked in this fall, it'll be game on for content creation again, which I've been really looking forward to. As much as I enjoy spending time with my family in the summer and, being with my kid, most every day and, scrambling to grade papers for online classes at night. Um, that there's an element of upheaval to that kind of unpredictability of the summer that doesn't jive well with my brain, and eventually I'm like tired out and I'm like, which is funny that like the real part of the work year for me is actually like what I'm most comfortable with, but I'm most comfortable being locked into a schedule, so I know exactly what's happening and when. That always puts me at ease, so pretty happy with that. Looking forward to that. I will mention I got a new microphone, like a big boy microphone, a legit one. I don't think it's actually that legit, but it's one that has like a stand and sits in front of me, which is, something I thought I would never get. Um, but over the summer, I attempted to film a random episode of WTR, and my little like lapel mic failed like halfway through it, and that drove me pretty crazy. So I invested in something that's more stable, something that's more of a sure bet that I know is in front of me and working. I can actually see the functionality of it. So anyway, I don't know, because there's like actual settings on this thing. I have no idea what I'm doing. I have to like figure out sound now, I guess. Whole new frontier for me. So I did do a couple test runs on this thing, and I basically have all the sliders on it for all the settings set like dead center. So you guys will have to tell me if you see this as an improvement, um, or not, and just bear with me. I'm still experimenting with it. I find it strange that like I can hear myself like swallowing and stuff now. I mean, it picks up like a lot more. So um, that's a little odd, but hopefully, not a big deal to you guys. You guys let me know. Um, I will also say this episode of WTR is going to come out for audio listeners only. And then I will follow it up with video of my tank that the sound is overlaid on and post that to YouTube. So if you want to converse about this episode, hit me up on Instagram. I'm real active on Instagram now. I keep forgetting to mention that, but yeah, my Instagram presence has definitely grown, and that's basically where I communicate now primarily, with anybody who follows the platform, so to speak. So reach out on there if you really want to talk about it, or give me a few days to get the video working on YouTube. I had to order some cables that'll allow for file transfer to occur quicker, because it is like 4K video of a reef tank for like over an hour, so it's pretty large file size. Um, so yeah, looking to alleviate that process, but anyway, hope you guys had a great summer. I know despite kind of the general day to day craziness of summer, this was a big summer for me. It was a big summer for my tank. I think I'm going to do an episode in the future that is just solely squarely about the changes that I have made to my main reef system. And I actually have huge changes in the making for the 25-gallon nano tank. The clownfish anemone tank just continues to persist as it is. Um, but all three tanks are chugging along, doing. I would say the main system is more than chugging along. My main system is really doing well, and I continue to make all kinds of slight changes and improvements to it. I'm really happy about where that tank is headed and where it is currently. So pretty thrilled with that. And also, don't know if you guys care, but I got a promotion at work, which is pretty sweet. So Um, in teaching, you have like, in college teaching, I should say, you have like an army of adjunct instructors who get paid by the class, and they're like contingent employees. So like your employment and your income is wholly contingent upon how many courses the university has left over after quote unquote full-time instructors, and full-on professors like take on, the course loads that they so choose. So whatever's left gets thrown to the pool of adjuncts, and it's very difficult to get out of the pool of adjuncts. The university system in America is such that adjunct has become par for the course, and it's really unfortunate. It's kind of a bad shake, especially for people with like master's degrees and greater, who've worked really hard to get where they are and are often extremely passionate. But I was fortunate enough to, through my hard work, get recognized for that hard work by my department, and I was able to attain a position in like full time faculty. So I am basically, I don't have to worry about you know student population contracting and me having to sell all my reefing equipment because I only got one class to teach during one of the main semesters. So that's like a huge burden off of me. I mean, it feels really good to just have like financial certainty and like, be able to have my salary rise regularly with inflation, and like, I mean, it's way better. So super super happy about that. Yeah, I'm excited. New income level should kick in like September, and I mean it's not like it's big money or anything, but it's enough money that like I can actually look at getting some interesting toys and critters for the reef tank, and kind of plan it out and like actually follow through on it, and not just like randomly do that kind of stuff when money's good. You know what I mean? I can actually be like, all right, in a couple months I'm gonna get this or that. So that's exciting. Pretty awesome. Anyway, enough about me. I uh, I want to focus in this episode. I'm going to ease into the content. I'm going to ease back into this podcast. I've been away from it for a while, and there was so much that transpired in the reef keeping hobby over the course of the summer. I mean, if you guys follow along, if you're big on Facebook and reef keeping, or Instagram and reef keeping, and you follow along closely by any measure, I mean, you know that. I mean, it was kind of a wild summer as far as, especially like on the industry side, and even a little bit on like the livestock side. Some of the stuff that's gone on, right? Most recently, that like ban on certain clams, or proposed ban by the U.S. government. I have to look into it still and get the details on it, but that situation is constantly evolving. I feel like new things are happening in the livestock side, like every month. I need to pay more attention to that. I'm so industry and gear focused. I need to really like go out of my way to pay attention to the side of the hobby that's about the actual things we keep in our tank. Um, so yeah, I plan on kind of keeping my ear to the ground in that sector of the hobby more. But on the gear side, on the industry side, my lord, yeah, it's been an eventful summer, and it's so eventful that like I almost struggle to, when I was trying to line up like what do I want to talk about this season, like how do I want to kick this season off. I was just like, man, I feel overwhelmed. Like I don't even really know where to begin, or how to like, you know, how to parse through in like an organized, like sensible way, like what has gone down. So I think I'm gonna like piecemeal it out and take it really slow. Maybe some episodes of WTR are a little bit shorter so that I can like, logically group and piecemeal out things that have been going on and kind of go back over them. Um, that's why I wish I could do more in the summer. That's why I wish, because if I could have covered that as things were happening on the industry side, I wouldn't feel that way, and you guys would have a lot more episodes. But so it goes, right? I'm going to ease back into content by talking about media today, like in reef keeping. So like, I'm going to focus disproportionately on reef builders, because when it comes to media in the hobby, like that's my kind of go-to media source, right? Um, but I just want to converse loosely about like reef keeping media and like what it is, what it means, what's at stake. So, um, when I really started to think about this, you know, I realized that it's kind of amazing that we have media sources at all in the reef keeping hobby. And if you really think about it, it's like wow, because the hobby is so impossibly small. Like reef keeping, which includes like coral, right, is like a subset of saltwater aquarium keeping, which is a subset of like aquariums in general, which is already like I would have to imagine a smaller subset of the pet industry than like, cats and dogs and stuff like that. So like we are literally like one of the most niche specialized, contingents of, hobbyists in the entirety of like pet owners maybe of the entire like pet world. So it's crazy to me that, and I know it's a high dollar hobby, right? And that's probably why we can support like certain media sources, but it's amazing to me that we have media sources at all. And when I started to look at those media sources, the it makes sense to me that the media sources in the hobby, from my standpoint at least, how I look at them, I mean, there's a wide variety of like you know forms, I guess, of media. So I would say that like Reef Builders is probably the most like polished together group of as far as media sources are concerned. And they're doing the most like quote unquote traditionally media things, right? Like publishing, putting out breaking news announcements on social media with quick little articles tagged when things happen, like the ban on clams the other day when all that information came out. And writing like, detailed articles about, various things, and having guest contributors who are, like paid or give their time to put forth articles so that they can publish them, and keeping all those articles like curated and trying to drive traffic through those articles. Like that's, excuse me, that's pretty traditionally media feel to me. And I would say like the closest that comes to this outside in reef keeping specifically, outside of Reef Builders, would be like reefs.com, which reefs.com is, I'll be honest with you, until I really started like thinking about this topic and like kind of poking around, I guess I knew of the existence of reefs.com, but I was not like, I can't really remember ever going there like like purposefully. You know what I mean? And I think that's because it seems like reefs.com, whereas a Reef Builders is earnestly trying to generate content and push out content, it doesn't feel like that. And I could be wrong, by the way. This is literally my personal perception. But it doesn't feel like reefs.com, what they're doing is quite the same in that sense. It seems like reefs.com is generating articles and stuff like that, kind of like, at the pace that its contributors so choose to produce articles. Um, and they seem for fewer and farther between, than uh, what Reef Builders produces. And that's not to say there's not some really great stuff. As I poked around reefs.com, I was impressed by how organized it is. It was easy to navigate. They have like an app. I haven't tried the app, but they have an app. I mean, that's pretty impressive alone. Um, and they had a bunch of really interesting articles that I spotted. Excuse me. So, reefs.com is interesting for sure, and it's the nearest like it's doing something that is in the same vicinity of what Reef Builders is doing, or they're the closest to that, I would say, from what I have found. And by the way, if you guys know sources that are like, in Australia or Europe that are doing, something kind of traditionally media like Reef Builders, please let me know. I'd love to follow them. And, I just don't, I haven't accessed them yet. But outside of these sources, these, couple of sources that seem to be doing more traditionally things, alongside, by the way, like Reef Builders also is kind of like a hybrid because I think they have to be to drive views and attention. They also go and produce a lot of content where they're like touring coral farms and going and looking at, amazing private reef tanks and talking to industry experts and scientific experts and, like whole litany of, running Reef Therapy, the podcast, like whole sector of like, media engagement that's all like video and audio driven. And I think you kind of have to be dynamic in that way. Like every major media company, for whether it's WAPO or Fox or like, yeah, MSNBC, whatever, all these major news organizations, on a national or world level also run their own little like podcast or daily news briefs, or they're posting video all the time, and like that's just kind of the nature of the beast now, I think, in media. It kind of always was the nature of the beast for Reef Builders. In fact, I'm pretty sure they started, I could be wrong, I didn't follow them closely enough at the time, but I'm sure that Jake probably got most of his traction back in the early days of posting for Reef Builders, um from video content. Like and if I, again, I could be wrong, maybe he was writing articles before he was doing videos, totally possible. But at least my awareness of Reef Builders, like, came from seeing video from Jake, right? And I think it's that way for a lot of people. So um there are other media entities as well, so like, but I wouldn't call them traditional or traditionally, like traditional esque media. Um, there's, entities in the hobby like, you know like Polo Reef's kind of interesting to me in this way. Like, Polo Reef to me seems to like oscillate between wanting to be something more than a vanity project, and then like just like, look how cool all of our stuff is, like kind of it, I think it started out vanity, and now it's like, sometimes kind of trying to become more, and then like their attempts to kind of get into more than vanity, I'm like, oh, interesting, it's happening, and then it's like it drops off, and I'm like, was that happening? Maybe not. So it's interesting, and there's a lot of like, of course, not on the funding level of like a Polo Reef, because I'm pretty sure that's got to be the most like concentrated money in the hobby, um, at least in, that one man can control. But there are other entities that kind of get into that territory as well, right? Like, I would argue that even BRS, like back in the day, back when they used to run something called a YouTube channel, that they would kind of dip into that, right? Like they would at least like they were running a podcast where they would talk about what was going on in the industry. And then they would produce video, especially like interviews with experts and stuff, where they would like also kind of do a little bit of like newsy function, or like reporting function, but that's kind of completely gone away. And it just seems like there's entities that are like quasi reporting structures because they don't always do it. They do it sometimes, but not always. And then there's this whole litany of like amateur, like, social media presence people, like Greg Carroll and his live streams, right? Who do this like a weekly or daily live stream, or they do whatever, like, little like YouTube events or something, or maybe they run a podcast or whatever, and they give, like check-ins with stuff that's going on and their thoughts on stuff that's going on, or they have guests who talk, like whatever. It's kind of like, in those situations, it's almost like what you can glean about the hobby. Like if it comes up, it comes up, you know what I mean? It's not like they're going out there and like driving for that content, like, on a day-to-day or week-to-week, month-to-month basis. when it happens to be talked about, it happens to be talked about. When that's like, in the forefront of the conversation, it happens to be there. So um, it's a true amalgam, right? Like media, quote unquote, in the reef keeping hobby. I mean, you have all different types, but really not that many total sources that are even like quasi media. So, I mean, that reflects the niche, very small nature of the hobby, I think. Um, but as I indicated earlier, like, Reef Builders is my default because I find them to be a really unique beast. And I don't think there's anything else quite like them in the hobby. And with their current trajectory, I feel like they have the most promise, right? Um, you know, so like let me explain. So presumably, and again, my perception, right? I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but like from where I sit, Reef Builders seems to derive its sponsorship. So like companies that are, you know, giving money to Reef Builders to fund it, to keep it going. I mean, of course they make money on content, right? Like from YouTube income and stuff like that. You're going to make some money on that. You hope to make a lot of money at it because then you have like less sponsorship reliance. I would think if you were a media organization, like the more like, money we can do, like produce ourselves, the less we have to worry about, necessarily tracking down sponsorship. But from what I can tell, and like again, maybe the perception is different for other people. From what I can tell, Reef Builders sponsors seem to be kind of all over the board. I think that's a good thing, right? I think that's I won't say it's a unique thing because again, there's nobody else I can really compare them to in the hobby. There's not like, Reef Creators who's doing the same thing as Reef Builders. And I'm like, oh, Aperture is just bankrolling Reef Creators compared to Reef Builders, who's like, kind of getting sponsorship from all over the board. I can't make that comparison. But from what I can tell, just from like the banner, sponsors that, run at the beginning of videos or like the coverage itself, like what kinds of manufacturers they talk to or what kind of gear they review, or it does not seem to me that there's like any kind of compelling argument to be made for like, oh, Reef Builders is like totally, pigeonholing themselves with this one company or companies. It seems to me that like, sponsorship seems to be a pretty like when you're a Reef Builder sponsor, they care about it. I can see that, but it doesn't seem like they care about one more than the other, which I think is really respectable, right? That's a really commendable thing. Again, my perception, you guys tell me if you have a different perception, but like, I think that's pretty commendable. And when I talk about this, by the way, I talk about this from like a now standpoint, like right now, right? Like from like Raj taking over Reef Builders to now. I have not sensed like I've not sensed like a huge wonk toward one entity or another as far as like favoritism would be concerned or like lean, so to speak. And I think that's good, right? Because here's let me expand on it and like relate it to our world now. So our world now, in the era of like, at least on a national level in America, of like quote unquote fake news, right? Everybody's looking for fake news all the time. So I think that like, you know, people perceive the news, and I think rightly so in most cases, to be basically a product of what like to basically produce perceptions that are attempting to impact society based on the wishes of an elite wealthy few who are funding that news organization, right? Like publicly funded news in America is like weak to non-existent. It's all like, news organizations that are bankrolled by rich people basically. And so like you look at those rich people who have like, investorship or like ownership positions and stakes in news companies, like Fox News or MSNBC, like, CNN, like these kinds of national news entities. And you're like, oh, these people either like bankroll this news organization or own it or like, invest in it or like are otherwise associated with it because of their political leanings or whatever. Therefore, I don't trust it because I know that like those people can sway that content however they want, and they can like, affect the perception of that content however they want to try to make the masses of people do as they please, right? To as a means to an end for like a higher set of goals that is probably definitely benefiting super rich and powerful people, right? So like I think that's where like a lot of like animosity toward media, especially like traditional esque media, is coming from in today's world. Is I think there is like more awareness of that now than there probably ever has been. At least, and maybe I put that wrong. I think people care. Like I think people are always aware. I think people care more about that now than they ever have before. Probably because the country, everything is so politicized now, right? Everything is like, just like on a hair trigger. But um, I think that reef builders either just by the nature of like, and I guess it would be, Raj as like the primary leader here, either by just how he operates. Like I'm not gonna like, put anyone up on a pedestal over anyone else who has, money involved in the reef builders game, or like by conscious decision, right? Like we are consciously going to attempt to not, you know get way too deep in with one entity, because then people will stop trusting us, whether it's just his nature or it is literally like, a something that they work at. I think they're doing a pretty good job, and I think that's laudable, right? That's a really laudable thing. And it's kind of rare in like, media that gets into like the traditional esque media game, right? But so like weird things have kind of like I've noticed gone on with like reef builders in recent, like since I guess Raj took over. So like, you know, to kind of recap the story, I'll kind of start where I started with reef builders. Like with reef builders for me, I started with Reef Builders like day one in this hobby. Like they were one, along with like BRS and like, a couple other channels. They were like one entity that I immediately, like Jake Adams videos, I was like, okay, like I'm trying to learn how to really do this hobby. And this guy, he's exploding like a basket full of cherry bombs for this hobby at all given times in all content, right? Like that, I think, Jake, as experienced as Jake was, like I think that his deep level of like history and experience with the hobby and with reef keeping is actually his, which is crazy to say, but I think it's like his second greatest asset. I think his first greatest asset was literally like an almost an illness obsession with the reef keeping hobby, right? Which like, you know, I don't think even I love this hobby and I'm obsessed with it. I live it and breathe it like in all of my free time. And I still don't think I even like understand to a to a fraction of a degree how obsessed Jake was with the hobby. And I think that like you need somebody like that if you're gonna be like an organization that is like, finance that needs to find financial footing and stability in large part due to the content creation of people, an individual or individuals on your team. I think you need at least one Jake, or you need a group of people who are all like, still pretty massively invested, um, in the hobby itself, in the subject matter itself. So like, I was immediately drawn in, and when reef therapy began, that really became my jam. Like in my previous life, in the private sector, I would travel a ton. I was constantly traveling all throughout my territory. And man, listening to Jake and Mark on Reef Builders was like, when a new episode would drop, I was so happy. And when I left the private sector because my soul was dying and I was a husk of what was formerly a human being, when I left and came back to education because where my heart was, I was walking to campus every day, long distances, because in the city I live in, living close to the heart of the city is extremely expensive. So, but walking is like my main form of exercise. It still is. So I would walk to and from campus in the Mississippi heat, very nearly an unbearable experience. I got thick northern blood. I'm from Kalamazoo, so like it was hot. And one of the things that got me through those walks was literally listening to Reef Therapy, right? And I remember listening to the last Reef Therapy that came out right before Jake passed. Um, that was so weird to me to be like, oh, there's not going to be Reef Therapy this week because he's gone. Like that was super weird. And I won't pretend that like, oh, like Jake meant so very much to me. Like it's been really interesting since Jake died. The like amount the I don't even know how to begin to describe the impact of him passing on the hobby, both in real terms and by the way, in like fake terms. Like I feel a lot of like I feel that Jake is often used as like a body shield, for like winning arguments and stuff that I see going on like Reef to Reef or, YouTube comments or whatever, or on Instagram. I feel like that's really, really weird. Like people who never even, met the guy, shook his hand, like, using him as like a way to end well, Jake did this, and it was Jake. Like, this is the end of the conversation. I win. And it's like, that's weird, man. I see a lot of that go on. Yeah, I've seen some weird, like, what I suspect to be, fakeness associated with, people, and their feelings around his death. I've seen a lot of, like, him being used in his death as a means to an end. And I never like that. I think that's super strange and unfair. Um, but I have also seen plenty of like genuine sadness, right? That I totally buy. I'm like, you know, um, and I know that it's not like it's strange. It's not like sadness, like he was my best friend and I lost him sadness. Like it couldn't be that. But tons of people had this like, he was their guy. Like Jake was their guy. And I think that a lot of the hobby for whom Jake was like their guy or one of their guys, I think that a lot of the hobby has yet to still, and that's strange too, that like years later it still lingers. But I feel like a lot of people have yet to deal with their sadness about that. And I feel like that like lingering like dejection and sadness, with his passing has really had like a detrimental effect on like the crowd or like mass psychological effect regarding reef builders in the here and now. And I think it's unfair. Let me explain. So I would argue that today, now like Reef Builders is a whole organization, right? Of like people who you see, whoever you follow, whatever segments of Reef Builders you adhere to, you're gonna who you feel is at the forefront of Reef Builders right now, who the face of the organization is probably gonna be different than mine, right? To me, the face of the organization, especially because like Reef Therapy was like my bread and butter. I've watched every episode and I will continue to watch every episode. Are Remy and Salem, right? So like to me, like Reef Builders is the Remy and Salem show, right? But they have this whole like cast and crew of like brilliant supporting people. So like, Windsor is still with them. I know Jeremy overseas does a ton. And like then you have people like, contributors who can like, at a, pin drop, they can jump in and contribute in a massive way who are close to the organization, like Sean Ono, right? I love when Sean Ono goes on, Reef Recap or he was on Reef Therapy a while back, young and brilliant. Like there are people who are in the orbit, I sense, of Reef Builders who contribute either like with their under their own name, where they're doing like series or like themes that they cover and publish articles on for Reef Builders, or get tapped to be guests for Reef Builders, or there's a whole bunch of like guest writers who just are listed as like guest writer. But I'm pretty sure the Reef Builders network, compared to most networks in one of the tiniest like hobby spaces on Earth, like like it's pretty healthy and extensive, with a lot of smart, talented people associated with it, right? So like, what the who what figure is like leading the charge for Reef Builders in your mind could very well be different than me, right? But for me, again, it's like Remy and Salem. So, like, the Remy and Salem dynamic has been like since they kind of took over, and I would say most people probably see it this way too, because they are, I think, probably the most visible. So, like, the Remy and Salem dynamic, I think, is absolutely phenomenal. And it's very strange to me to still be hearing this like murmur in the background of the hobby, and the murmur goes something like this: oh, Reef Builders is really falling off, Reef Builder Jake is a Reef Builders falling off, they're not the same, Jake. And I'm just like, what? Like, I don't understand. So like, yeah, Jake passed, and Jake was an absolute giant, right? Because he was like basically had like obsessive compulsive disorder, where like if he did not reef keep like 12 hours a day or do things related to reef keeping like 12 hours a day, he like couldn't live with himself. You know what I mean? So like that is a unique beast. That is like that comes along very infrequently, right? And I also think that he really, and again, this is my projection. This is my like, I'm guessing. He seemed really to me to be a workaholic, and be like workaholic people who have that much passion, they also kind of tend, usually inadvertently, to be a little bit control freaky, right? So like Jake was publishing articles all the time, making video content all the time, maintaining reef tanks all the time. He was intricately tied in with, what was going on in the business and sponsorships, and like it you are spread so thin, in that pursuit, and pursuing everything all the time, being spread out in all these different directions. So it's interesting, like that now, like so like let me think how I want to say this. Let me proceed carefully, because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So like I often felt that Jake was spread too thin, right? I listened to Jake because he had a wealth of experience that very few people could hold a candle to. And he was a smart guy, right? Absolutely. And his passion was literally like, infectious, like to the nth degree. Um, Reasons that I did not really love Jake. I kind of thought that he came off as a dick, like a lot, right? Like, and again, I mean, like this is why I tread carefully. Like, I give him all the credit in the world, but I thought he came off as a dick a lot of times. And um, I also thought that I could tell that he was kind of spread too thin at times, right? Um, and when I mean, I've watched so much Reef Builders content It's almost like I could tell the times when that was happening. Um, like he kind of like I feel like Reef Builders now is the content is more careful. You know what I mean? Like there's more thought behind it. It often seemed to me under Jake, content was just being spammed out, right? And it often seemed when he would like Jake would not hesitate if a piece of gear was terrible. He would tell you it was terrible, right? So like, there was that level of objectivity. But oftentimes I felt like just by the nature of him being spread in so many different directions, he was just kind of regurgitating what like the company had told him about a product when he was loosely discussing a product. And I don't sense as much of that now, right? I sense you know like Reef Builders not really getting behind any product, especially until they've like extensively tested it. And then the consideration for products, which by the way is less. They do less product stuff now because Jake was a gearhead too, as well as being obsessed with corals and all that. Um, and I don't know that like Remy and Salem are gearheads on this in the same sense that Jake was. And maybe that content will come, right? But I often felt that Jake was spread so many different ways. It was just kind of regurgitation, right? Um, Also, I sensed a little more and again, I've said it 100 times. This is my perception. I sensed more uh like like a softer approach to certain companies, especially ones that were providing like a lot of free stuff. Like when Aperture started sucking up entities left and right. There goes Ecotech. There goes Neptune. Oh, more exclusive distribution partnership. Like when all that was going on, when I listened back on like Reef Therapies and like other discussions at the time that Jake was a part of, Jake was like kind of defending that. He was like Mark, like easygoing Mark was way more skeptical of what could result of all that than Jake was. I mean, Jake was like, close to screaming in a couple of different Reef Therapies about, all these people need to shut up on Reef to Reef about talking about, what bad could come of this. Nothing's going to change or it'll be fine or it'll be better. And it wasn't. It wasn't at all, right? Like this hobby has undergone tremendous upheaval and I think is worse for what Aperture has done to it. And again, that's perception. I truly believe that they did terrible damage to like innovation and like pricing and like just the like quality of the hobby on the industry side. I really do. I think that I'm not going to get into it. I have gone for entire episodes on that. But Jake was literally like, he like defended that. He was like, I mean, like to the point where he's cutting Mark off sometimes to defend it, to defend Aperture and what they were doing. And so it's always confusing to me when people are like, and by the way, I don't know what this effect is. People seem to really attack Remy a lot. And I've literally seen people say stuff like, oh, he just feels like so much more of a shill to me than Jake did. And I'm looking at the actual content and what happened and again, it wasn't all the time. I'm not calling Jake like a perpetual shill, but I really look at that Aperture period as like an interesting case study on like Jake and like how he felt about these things. And then I look at like Remy and what he's doing, where I've sensed none of that. And I look at that criticism, like he's more shilly than Jake, you know, or he's like, defending sponsors and stuff more than Jake or whatever. And I look at that and I'm like, okay, I think you're confusing the fact that like Jake could often be like a hardcore dick, and you're thinking just because that was his personality that he went hard at everybody and all these companies all the time and he was like some renegade against them. He wasn't, right? Like he really, that was not, maybe again, if the product was really really bad, maybe, but like he really, it wasn't like his tact on like a daily basis. So That's always interesting to me, and I feel like Remy gets punched in the face by the like general hobbyists more than Salem does, because I think that like Salem, like the spirit that Salem and that you can see in him, I think that it reminds people of Jake, right? So like, and again, like Salem's real young, but like, so he doesn't have like the involvement on all these different, levels. I don't think that like, Jake obviously did. But regardless, like people can see the spark of Jake living on in Salem. And I think that's again, like, despite Salem's deep scientific knowledge that he can bring to the table, like formal, like, college education, scientific knowledge, and how incredibly valuable that is. I think probably in the long term to Reef Builders, his greatest asset, and probably his greatest asset for many of us, because we love to watch it, just like we love to watch Jake for it, is the passion, right? I mean, it's just like boiling over in every conversation about reef keeping that I see that guy in. And it's interesting, like, because he has so much passion, right? It's often unbridled when he gets rolling. And I think that's where, like, Remy provides this, like, seasoned, calm, collected counterbalance to Salem. And I think that they feed off each other, because Remy's a pretty laid back guy. But I think he like rises a little bit to match Salem's energy. But Salem also like will look at Remy and be like, okay, like, we are very different in this moment. I'm gonna kind of like bring my hyperness down to your level for a second. Like, I think that they really complement each other so very well. Also, if you really listen close to like reef therapy episodes, um, like Remy typically plays the role of like shepherding the conversation. And by the way, he's an absolute expert in this. I feel like he's super intuitive. So like I feel like he's way more intuitive than Jake ever was. Jake ran people over in conversations like all the time. All the time. Even Mark. You just run him over, man. And that always bothered me. I hate listening to content like that when it is like that. And it wasn't like that all the time, but it's like watching like more awkward episodes of The Office when like Michael Scott is just like doing something absolutely wild that's like super offensive, and I would literally have to like look away from it because I feel so much internal embarrassment. Like when Jake would just steamroll somebody in conversation or like correct them on a choral name or whatever. Oh, that would make me like cringe. And like it really like again, some people, like, you can like what you like. I'm not knocking you if you liked that. If you found it entertaining to just watch, you know, and again, it wasn't all the time. Let's say it was 25% of the time he was running people over. If you like that, that's cool. Like, just I can't tell you what to like, but like I've never, not once, seen Remy just steamroll somebody, right? By the way, for that matter, I've never seen Salem in any of their content ever just steamroll somebody. So, from my perspective, and maybe it's because like at heart I'm a pretty introverted individual who like, you know, in a situation that is like, awkward or something, like like I'm always the guy that if somebody does something embarrassing, I'm like looking away to save them the embarrassment. After I know they're not hurt, I'm gonna like look away because I want to act like I didn't even see it, so that they are saved a little bit of embarrassment, because that's me. That's how I am, right? I'm not the guy who stands there and laughs at them. I feel like, that's like my personality is much more like comfortable with Remy and Salem in this way, especially Remy, right? Um, so it's always curious to me. It's always curious to me that people will attack, again, especially Remy, for like, you know, feeling shilly or whatever. Uh, or like, I just don't enjoy watching them, or he's not experienced enough or whatever. Like maybe he doesn't have all those years of reef keeping experience, but I think that his experience with people and like intuition and running a conversation are so much vaster than what Jake brought to the table. I remember one episode with Jake. This is just one of my favorites. So it wasn't an episode of anything. I think it was just like, checking out a tank, because Jake would just do that sometimes. Like, oh, I'm on a plane here now, and I'm like at this guy's house. We're going to look at his tank. In this case, it was Sanjay, I think. I want to say he was at Sanjay's actual house. So, like, he went to Sanjay's actual house. Sanjay fed him dinner. He ate dinner with Sanjay and his wife. And then they were looking at, like, Sanjay's, I think, soft coral or LPS tank that's, like, right in the middle of Sanjay's house. Or right in his foyer or, like, whatever. And Sanjay was, like, trying to talk about the tank. And Jake literally, like, in the middle of Sanjay talking, answering a question that Jake had asked him, by the way, Jake just blurts out the proper name of a coral. So like Sanjay said, like, whatever, this is like an eternal gobstopper or whatever. And Jake literally was like, it's a bibbity boppity, and just absolutely steamrolled him. And again, it was who Jake was. Like Jake couldn't help it, man. Like that's just who he was. There are people who, basically all people, in my unassuming opinion, they just are a certain way, and some people have a little more control over like how they act. Like, but Jake just didn't. I don't think he was really interested in that, like having that control anyway. He just was who he was. He was very comfortable with that, and I remember it was so funny. So he corrects Sanjay, and Sanjay just looks up for a second, looks right at Jake, and he just goes, "I don't care about the proper taxonomic names of corals," and just keeps on rolling. And Jake did not correct him one more time. Oh my God, that was hilarious to me. So, like, there were times, by the way, that like Jake's attitude, there were select times when, depending on the person who he steamrolled, their response actually made it a brilliant, like, moment. So, like, sometimes it was really entertaining, sometimes it was just cringy, but I feel like we avoid that completely under, like, in the Remy and Salem at the forefront of Reef Builders era, right? Um, but I I think people are not. I think people are looking at. I think this is where part of this comes from. I think people are looking at, like, everything that happened from the moment Raj took over and provided a headshot photo for the announcement of him buying Reef Builders that literally made him look like he was like a Wall Street mogul, right? He's made fun of himself for that, by the way. He's not going to get mad that I said that. But he literally, like, you can look at I'm sure you can find it if you just, Google it. But like immediately upon Raj taking over, the backlash began, and I think really part of it was driven hilariously by the fact that Raj's a business guy. He owns, like, a business that services public aquarium, and not services public aquariums, I don't think, but provides like custom gear and stuff for them, and super successful at that. So like he is a wealthy, successful dude. But like this, and I'm sure that headshot was for like some kind of like business magazine or something. And as he said it, he just sent a headshot when Reef Builders requested a headshot. Is literally like the most Wall Street thing I have ever seen in my life. And by the way, I remember seeing that headshot and being like, okay, Reef Builders is going to be completely commercialized now. That's literally what I thought. I didn't know anything about Raj. I saw that headshot and I was like, it's over for Reef Builders. So, like, people who think that, just understand, like, people who thought that, I don't think anyone thinks that anymore. But the like bad feels started immediately, right? And Remy did work for BRS for a while, right? So he was Bahama Llama Coral first, and then because he loves the hobby and he wanted, I think, to make like a career in the hobby, he was like, oh, like, BRS is kind of like assembling like the Avengers on YouTube of people who can go and create content for them, and like they're interested, and like, again, I'm putting words in his, I don't know, but were I in his shoes with, a goal of making, potentially a life out of the hobby, like, yeah, I mean, at the time, BRS was still like this shining city on a hill, right? So he went and worked for BRS, and it was very short lived. But I feel like people still, like, for some people, Remy became like not Remy Bahama Llama, he became Remy Bulk Reef Supply. And so I think that as Aperture's as their like reputation tanked, like, even though it was unfair because it seemed like Remy was pretty dissatisfied and quickly got out of that position, I feel like he now is like one of his shoelaces is attached to Aperture, and they're just like sinking to the bottom of the ocean reputation wise. And Remy's just like trying to swim to the surface while he gets dragged by a shoelace. In the eyes of some people, I think that happened, and I don't think it's fair at all. Like, go look for Remy content at BRS. You're not gonna find very much, right? I don't think that lasted very long. I don't think that was for him. And so like but I feel like that did at the time, especially because it was, when he went to Reef Builders, it had happened not that long before. I think that more people felt like that at first. So it was like, Wall Street business mogul guy with that redonkulous headshot comes in and immediately hires, this guy who shilled out to BRS. What the hell? Reef Builders is destroyed. I think people felt like that, which is really interesting to me, because I'd followed like Reef Builders and Bahama Llama for so long. And I knew that, like, just from following Bahama Llama, that Remy wasn't in the BRS game anymore, and that had, like, ended pretty quickly. And so it didn't bother me. It didn't bother me like it bothered other people at first, right? Like, again, I don't think anybody's bothered by it anymore. I think, even people who were heavy skeptics of it, they've since come around and realized this isn't, that's not Remy's end goal. He's not Mr. Commercial. And also, I don't know how you could possibly look at Raj and be like, this guy's trying to run Reef Builders like a Wall Street mogul, like the guy in his headshot would. I don't. It's not fair, because Raj also brings in Salem, who I would say that Salem is one of the, like, as far as being involved in a platform that requires like sponsorship to operate for cash flow, and is looking at products all the time and interviewing people in the industry, and is, presumably close to a lot of these people. That's got to be like the most, like, like, skeptical, like, ready to doubt and ready to question people individuals that I have ever seen. And Remy's like right along with him. Like, Remy asks the hard questions too in Reef Therapy episodes all the time. Um, so I've just been fascinated by this lingering weirdness about, Reef Builders. Like, again, this like echo of, well, they've fallen off, Jake, without Jake, they've really fallen off. And I think that feeling is propagated by certain individuals too, by the way, potentially for gain, you know? Um Potentially. I'm not throwing that as a, I'm not condemning anyone for it, but, like, I kind of try to watch as much as I can watch in the reef keeping hobby of, like, streams and stuff that other people do. And it just seems to me like certain individuals, like, you know, never hesitate to take a dig at reef builders when they can. You know what I mean? Like, they really don't. They really will go ahead and make them. They're falling off. I hear that all the time from people, and I'm about sick of it. Because I think that reef builders is being more like, with the influence of Salem, and, like, the clear impartiality of Remy, like the careful impartiality of him when it comes to content. At least right now, again, anything could change at any time, right? A business is a business. At any moment, like, in the interest of money, a business can change. But right now, it really seems to me like Reef Builders has kind of taken a we're going to be skeptical and careful first approach. And you see that in everything from there not being like heavy there not being heavy favoritism of any one, entity that I can tell, all the way down to like, Salem organizing community science projects where he can get like actual numbers of people who are submitting like, clean data so that we can figure out if certain like methodologies are even hold water in the hobby. I mean, that's like, or certain substances that are hawked as, cure-alls or, this will fix everything solutions, and this stuff's actually being like scientifically tested now, like with the scientific method, like as he would say, not BRS science, real science. So um yeah, I just feel like Reef Builders has really found their groove recently, like, maybe even last few weeks, last couple months. And I still feel like there's a lingering like and I'll say this. If you have strayed, if you were a Reef Builders person and you strayed from Reef Builders, they deserve your attention again, in my opinion, right? I think that they do. I think they deserve your attention because I think that there are very few media entities that would put in the effort to walk this line. I feel like that effort wasn't always put in the Jake era. I really don't. And I feel like it's put in every day now. And again, it could change, but I sure hope it continues in perpetuity, because I think that the amount of like respect and clout that they deserve for this is enormous. What worries me is because there's still this lingering, oh, not seeing without Jake, because that lingering, like, you know, mass psychological thing has occurred. I don't want them to struggle when they're earnestly out there, producing dang good content, by the way. Like, I feel like they've hit a content stride in the last couple months and are like burning brighter like right now, even with like Reef Therapy that came out yesterday, like the one with Ishan from Triton. I mean, you go watch the questions that Salem asked Ishan, and what, like, by the way, he didn't come at Ishan. He asked totally fair questions, which is like journalistic practice. It's like what you should do. And Ishan was shifting around in his seat a little bit. Like, oh, like this really, is hitting at like the heart of my company. I gotta think about how I'm gonna answer this. That is what should be happening. That is healthy for the hobby. And when you have an entity like Reef Builders that's literally putting forth funds, like they are taking Reef Builders money and putting that money toward or using their assets or relationships to support someone with like a scientific background like Salem to, for instance, go out there and say, hey, everybody that seems to be using this series of bottles of stuff continues reporting problems with their whatever LPS dying. I'm gonna take that series of bottles that's being sold as like a LPS cure all, and I'm gonna test it, and I'm gonna put it through its paces, and I'm gonna run a community science project on it, or I'm gonna get aquabiomics testing done on it. I'm gonna like, what else is doing this, guys? Seriously, not very much, right? There's no I like okay. I shouldn't necessarily say what. I should also say who. Like, Telegram has done a ton of this, and he deserves all the credit in the world for that, right? The amount of curiosities and various examinations of certain solutions and substances and products that Telegram has kicked off. Even some of Salem's focal points, I'd probably say, um, are because of him going out of his way to track this stuff down and then literally put his own personal, private money into figuring out what the heck it is. And what kind of effect could it have, positive or negative? By the way, it's usually negative because these companies don't really care about you, not very many of them at least, who are trying to sell you bottles of whatever, bottles of mystery juice, right? Um, we've talked about radium doctoring before. It happens all the time. And there's now a concerted effort. So, like, for a while there, it was like Telegram doing that testing. I am not sure if Rich Ross, if Rich Ross has done like sent things in to be tested in that way, but Rich Ross and Ben on Reef Beef were also at the forefront of just being like, stop using stuff just for the hype. Stop using random products. Stop throwing, whatever in your tank, just glugging it all in there and hoping that it's going to make your corals grow 3 times as fast. Like, stop, stop, stop. By the way, if you don't watch Reef Beef, you should watch Reef Beef. I listen to Reef Beef every single week, and a lot of what I do is directly informed by Reef Beef. Highly, highly recommend that. But like between like the Rich Ross and Ben and like Telegram, like, little mini camp, like really pushing this stuff. And then some people like, Andrew Bauma and Eli, like, doing like, some of this like back end work to analyze this stuff and figure it out as part of that sphere. Like, I struggled to find like what else is there, what kind of organization is there that does any of this? And the answer is none, because the organizations in the hobby, they all have money tied in this stuff, right? If there is an like a business organization, they likely have money tied into selling you bottles of mystery juice. So the fact that Reef Builders is serving as an entity that is a media source just for our hobby, that now begins from a place of careful skepticism. I mean, I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm not saying that's going to always happen every time. Sometimes you're just putting the news out. I get that. But it seems to me that the meaningful content that they produce, they are starting from a place now of doubt and skepticism. And that would not be happening unless Salem, Remy, and Raj, and I'm sure some of the supporting people I listed earlier, were not all like, yeah, we're on board with starting from this place. You have to make a conscious decision, right? Because, like, look, it would be easier to just rah, 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 everything's great, new product here, new product there. Ooh, will this mystery juice work? Guess what all of that represents? Tap, 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 click, 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 ads, 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 money, money, money. That's what that represents. But they're not doing that, right? I'm not saying they're not going to craft their headline to still interest you, but they are not just like, how can we hype whatever new is out there to get people to click it just to make cash? As a media organization, I think that they deserve like a much higher amount of respect than they are currently getting, because it at least seems like they don't start from granted, the bar for media organizations is pretty low in the modern era, but man, they don't seem to be starting from that point, right? So if you're not starting from that point all the time as a media organization, and at least part of the time, maybe every time, like, even if you can't tell, you start from a spot of skepticism and doubt and carefully proceed forward, it deserves in my book, in our, especially in our hobby in the modern era, oh my God, it deserves a lot of respect, right? So anyway, like that's my reasoning in supporting them, and in like being concerned with the fact that there still seems to be this lingering psychological like mass effect where it's like, oh, Reef Builders, it used to be like, Jake, if you haven't come circled back around to Reef Builders since the era where they obviously struggled and were always going to struggle post Jake, circle back, because it's well worth it and they deserve it. And as long as they keep doing this, I mean, this is my, you know, I can't be like a blind fanboy, right? Um, they have to earn it, and unfortunately for reef builders, because the nature of what they do, they have to continually earn the trust of the hobby every day. Every day, people who think critically and follow reef builders are assessing them. Every article they put out, every video they put out, every podcast they put out, I personally, Galma's a reefer, witness the content and assess them every time, consciously or subconsciously. Hey, are you guys starting from a place of doubt and skepticism? Is this just a report where you're just regurgitating stuff? How many of those regurgitations are there? Right? How often is that going on? How many hard questions were asked in this interview? Did you make like your guest who's like running a business? Did you make him uncomfortable a couple of times? Because like that's what a good like journalistic media company should do. Did you guys do enough research behind this that you could actually hold a conversation about it? Did you like I look for those hallmarks. By the way, I mean like not everybody may look for all those hallmarks. I teach those hallmarks on a daily basis. Things to look for to critically examine content and people and companies. Um, but I'm looking for that all the time. And I know other people out there, more intelligent people than me in this hobby, are looking for that too. And a lot of intelligent people in this hobby seem to have both eyes on reef builders right now. And I think that it is because they've earned a level of respect that, you know, they previously may not have ever quite attained, right? Now, in the eyes of the average hobbyist who just wants to see cool tanks all day, like, yeah, they might be a little bit disappointed that it has taken reef builders some time to find their identity while still respecting their old identity and like building themselves back up to a point where they can be in stride. But they're, in my honest opinion, again, I look at their content that's come out the last month or two and is starting and is coming out right now. Like they're hot off the presses content that's happening right now. And I'm like, they feel like they are on more sure footing now than I have seen them since Jake. Seriously. Like I think that they have absolutely found their feet. Right? That's not to say a stumble won't happen here or there as they really cement themselves, but I really feel like they're on stable ground now. And I'm happy for that because what I worry about, what stresses me out about like the whole constant murmur of like a huge segment of the hobby, falling off. What worries me about that and drives me up a wall about it is, okay, so you stop watching Reef Builders and you stopped watching them because whatever, you had some preconceived notion about Remy and his, brief stint at BRS, or, you didn't like Raj's picture, or heck, because you just sad about Jake and, you don't know how to, process that because loss is hard to process. I'm not holding, the conundrum that is human psychology against anybody, but like, you needed time to heal or whatever. But because of this like like mass group mentality, right, this like momentum that got going about the whole reef builders falling off thing, now you're either thinking it or like parroting it. um you know uh what I worry about with that whole attitude is it's it's deriving reef builders, which is now, again, from where I sit, doing a net positive to this hobby and providing probably the most unbiased, straight shooting content that they have, that I've seen them, present. Since I started following them, they're like getting like unnecessarily punished, like unjustifiably punished, because people started straying away from them and now have not given them a chance, or just have formed this like solidified opinion where they're just gonna like murmur about they fell off forever. And here's what's at stake when a media organization starts doing the right thing, but they are not getting the views and taps and attention they need to get. I mean, they're still a company at the end of the day, right? They're a media organization, but they are a business. They need money, and they derive money from views and attention. So what I worry about is, like, one, they have to make the, unsavory and, but, sometimes apparent, I would say necessary, for a news organization or a media organization decision to go back to just seeking clicks and taps and attention and eyes at all costs, which I'd venture to say none of us want that, right? That would reduce Reef Builders to a hollow shell of what they are today. Um, they could just outright fail if they stuck to their guns, right? Until the bitter end, and they just disappear. That would suck because, again, like, the nearest entity I could see to a Reef Builders is like reefs.com. Their traffic would pick up, but again, like, I don't see signs out of that group that, like, they're trying to, like, enthusiastically, earnestly produce content. So we all get, like, less content and, like, less exposure in the hobby, and it just, like, we all love content about our hobby and people doing great things, seeing exposure in the hobby, and that would all be reduced for that, and the hobby would be worse for it. But here's what really scares me: if they disappeared, right? Um, think about in this tiny little hobby where, like, Reef Builders is the only, like, thing doing all the things that Reef Builders does. Think about what could potentially arise in its place, because whatever rose, if something did rise, would have to have a bunch of funding, right? So, like, there's a limited number of individuals and or entities who could have money in their coffers potentially to make this happen, right? So you're looking at, like, either a hyper wealthy, powerful person who would call all the shots with content and be able to do what at will, that what they wanted with the content, so that they could impact your opinion and impact where your dollars are flowing and impact what you care about. Or you're looking at, like, potentially, like, an entity or two on the business side, that, again, like, they if they chose to create some kind of media arm or media entity to fill that void, what would they give us? Everything stacked and swayed toward a direction that encouraged us all to just continue buying from their products, right? And bankrolling them. The way that the system exists with Reef Builders is imperfect, right? Sponsorship, as we on this podcast, on my channel in general, have long established, like, sponsorship is an imperfect thing. But sometimes, to be able to have an entity like Reef Builders in existence, it is a necessary evil to have sponsors. And if you're going to have sponsors, is it not better to have one, more of them, so that there's an even spread among the things that have power and sway behind your organization? And two, to be able to approach it, I guess, due to, there being a multitude of them, where you're like, well, there's lots of you, so, like, we're not going to favor any one. Like, we invite all sponsorship, but, like, we're not, and I would venture to say not all. I don't think they invite all, but essentially, they're not going to just pigeonhole themselves into one group or another group. That, to me, that fragmentation of support is better than a concentrated individual or company or a couple of companies basically backing all of it. That's way better. So we run the risk of, like, a darker entity with darker purposes being in control of the flow of information coming from like the media side of this hobby, which is incredibly small. And I don't think it's worth it, right? I don't think that, like, I don't know if saying it, I don't think it's worth it is the right way to put that, but I don't I it's because of sadness over Jake or some preconceived notion that any of us had. I guess I don't think it's worth like purposefully ignoring or steering oneself away from reef builders when you consider what could happen as a result of, like, just one more person, just one more person, just one more person not watching or listening or paying attention to what they're doing, because I think they're doing it that good, right? So, um, speaking of all things reef builders, they've got Reef Stock coming up in Chattanooga, and this kind of goes along with this whole new mentality that they have. Um, they so like, or I guess just new, I don't know, new approach, new vision for what things should be. I don't know if you guys know this. So I've been to a couple of Reef Paloozas in the past, right? Um, was not impressed. Reef Palooza is like, you know, um, flashy, everything, big companies trying to sell stuff, trying to get exposure, obnoxious influencers walking around with selfie sticks, you know, hey, what's going on, Reef Squad? I'm over at the Neptune booth today. Yeah. And that's basically like, I mean, like, Reef Palooza is like shill central, man. Like, that's like, in my honest, again, my unesteemed opinion comes up a lot. It is my podcast, but uh, it is like shiltasticness unbound. And I mean, it's interesting to see some of this at play, like at work. Um, it's, I don't know how many of you guys know this. I'll go back to what I was saying in the beginning. But like at these conventions that happen, a lot of times the elites, so to speak, social media influencers that are tied to companies, the agents of those companies or leaders of those companies that are at the convention, they have this like little boys club thing where they, like, after the show, like, go out and do boys club stuff, and just with each other though, because they're the cool kids, right? Yeah. So interestingly to me, uh, Salem, either on Reef Therapy or Reef Recap, like a month back or something, he essentially publicly called for an end to that, like, elite boys club deal at Reef Stock, and was like, instead of doing that and, like, siloing off, these people who are cool enough to be part of that group, I want to open this up and just have everybody who attends be able to just have a good time and mingle and go out for beers, and, so you can walk up and, like, shake Salem's hand, or, walk up and shake Rich Ross's hand, or whoever, I don't know if he's going to be there, but like whoever's there, and be perceived as an equal in the reef keeping world, right? That, to me, that feels very different. Very different than what goes on at the, Aquashellas uh and the Reef Paloozas of the world. And I think it's super admirable. I think it's super admirable. Um and also, there's gonna be guys that sell things, that buy booths for their companies at Reef Stock. You have to have a convention. That's how you have a convention. Some things must happen, but I sense, and it's just my sense, maybe others don't feel the same way. I sense, and partially because of, the people that Reef Stock attracts and the direction of Reef Builders, I sense that there's a lot more interest in, like, the science and, like, um, knowledge and the actual animals in the hobby that is being exuded from, this reef stock experience that's shaping up for Chattanooga for later in August than what necessarily goes on at like an Aquashella or a Reef Palooza. So when it comes to conventions, like I know Chattanooga is like pretty far off the beaten path for a lot of people. It's an interesting location because Chattanooga is really cool. Like, you know, I'm a guy who's always taken poor guy vacations. I've never like jet set it off to Europe. I never will. I'll never be able to afford going to Hawaii. Like I never. So like I literally like a vacation for me is like going to Gatlinburg. Like that's like that's a big time vacation for me. So like, or going like up to like northern Michigan. You know what I mean? Like that's a vacation in my world. And so my family's gone a couple of times for long weekends to Chattanooga because it's one of those destinations. Like, it's cool. They have a whole bunch of stuff to do there that's family oriented, a ton of stuff to do there that's adult oriented. So whether or not you bring your family, there will be stuff to do for everybody. Um, and I like it. So I appreciate the location for that. It's not just for adults. Like if you wanted to bring your family, you could. And that's unique to me too, that there's like it's not like some convention center that's like off the highway somewhere. And like, the coolest thing nearby is like, the hotel bar or like a Waffle House next door, and then your view from your room is like the freeway, right? It's in the heart. The hotel they picked is like in the heart of Chattanooga, like right downtown. And I think the Marriott, and the rate seemed pretty good, right? But I'll tell you guys, like because of this tact that is being taken with the whole kind of ending the boys club deal and ending the this is only for the elites after everybody leaves the convention hall kind of thing, and kind of the emphasis on like the animals and the science. I'm pretty close to Chattanooga, like if just a few hour drive, and I think I'm going to go. So I don't want to like, first of all, just let me say, I'm going to be flying under the radar, and I don't like, I am not about like, oh yeah, like let's, take a bunch of selfies, and me, I don't even show my face. Actually, just talking about this right now, like gives me like, I can feel my blood pressure going up. But then I think about like meeting some of you guys who have like been around and supported me and my platform, and we the Reefers, and are interacting with me on Instagram every week, and I'm like, I want to meet some of these people so bad. So like I mentioned earlier, like with this promotion I got, like I don't start seeing the money from that until the semester's fully underway, and that's into September. So like money's real tight right now. So I don't want to disappoint anybody. I'm gonna put like a 90% chance on this. But as long as like some crazy thing doesn't happen, my car doesn't like blow out all four tires tomorrow, like I'm pretty sure I'm gonna be there. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna be in Chattanooga for Reef Stock. And I'm doing that. I kind of swore off reef conventions after Reef Palooza put a bad taste in my mouth twice. And I just was like, I'm not about this. And but I think that because of what's happening with reef stock and how that feels different, I'm so hopeful for it. And I want to support Reef Builders because I think they've earned it. And so I think it's, oh man, I don't want to get the dates wrong. I think it's August 24th and 25th. I think. A little bit of weird timing for a lot of people. Kind of strange timing, and again, kind of an off the beaten path location. But like, I would say if you can at all make it, and you follow me, my platform, like and support me, like I want you to shoot me hop on Instagram and shoot me a DM and let me know that you're gonna go. I just want to know like who all I could expect to see there. Um, know that I probably am not going to want to take pictures or anything like that. I'm under no illusions that I'm some kind of like attraction. I have 1,500 followers on YouTube. I am small potatoes. I just want to meet you. If you're going to be there, I would love to shake your hand. And I really think I will end up being there. Again, I'm not going to do 100% on it. I'm pretty darn sure. I really do want to go. I think it would be cool. So, um, yeah, guys, kind of concludes what I wanted to talk about with all this. Hopefully I kind of covered everything. If Reef Builders listens to this, anybody from there, I hope I got details and stuff right. I'm sorry if I didn't. I'm just, again, I'm a guy. I'm a reef keeper, and I just, I right now, because of what Reef Builders has done and the direction that they're taking, the tack that they're taking, I have come to really respect what they are doing within the context of like what they are able to do as like a business. You know what I mean? Like it's always going to be flawed, but I feel like they're doing the absolute best that they can within within the flawed parameters within which a business in this hobby must, unfortunately exist. And I really think that's laudable, and that more entities in this hobby should aspire to that kind of, you know, just should aspire to that. So, um, all right, guys, there's a ton to talk about, a ton that's going on in this hobby, and I'm going to be diving into all of it. I won't say I'm going to have an episode out like every week. I know I said I wouldn't last time for season one, and that I basically did. Um, I am teaching an overage of classes so that I can get a little bit of extra money. There were some available, so I took a couple of extra classes. So I won't have quite as much time as I did during the season one run. So I would say like every 2-3 weeks throughout like the fall and spring semester, like you could bank on an episode within those time frames. And then I would say if I figure out the schedule and really get it down pat, and my life feels real structured, then I might be able to do an every week deal. I don't know if there's enough to talk about for that, but I can talk a lot, as you guys know. So as always, thank you for listening to We the Reefers. I really appreciate it. And feel free to reach out to me. And once this is posted in a few days to YouTube, just give me like, I don't know, give me a week after you hear this. And it'll be posted to YouTube, and I would love to continue the conversation there. Or if you have some real pointed thoughts, I would love to hear from you. Shoot me a DM on Instagram. I'd love it. All right, guys. Hope you guys have a good one.